Yeah, so John Chads originally owned 500 acres of land that he inherited from his father when he became of age at the age of 21, which was 17.
We're not exactly
He
sure.
was born in 1697, roughly. So when he became 21, this became his land. And he lived here his entire life.
Now, did he like do any kind of like trades work or anything like that?
Yes, so he owned a ferry, which people would pay to put their oxen cart or their a person on this ferry when the river was high, and then they could get across the river because there was no bridge back then. They built the bridge, I believe, in 1830s, and that he also had a ford, which is a shallow spot in the river.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they can identify them because blacksmith would drop slag in the river to build up the riverbed. So when the water was shallow, they could cross the river there. He also farmed the land, so he had the 500 acres, but we believe tenant farmers probably farmed the land. And he also owned half interest in a corn mill, which was located at the Brandywine River Museum. When his father died, his mother and he both got half interest in that. But he probably sold it off because we don't have any records of him working the mill, eh, early into his marriage.
And it's worth keeping in mind also. It's worth keeping in mind also that Baltimore Pike, present day Route One, did exist at a road as a road in the 1700s. It was called Ye Great Road to Nottingham, but it was still the main overland thoroughfare between Philadelphia and Baltimore. So the reason that John Chads established a ferry here is that there was a lot of traffic traveling through this area over the Brandywine Creek from Philadelphia west and from Maryland up north to Pennsylvania.
And then another main thing that he had was a tavern. So he petitioned the court in 1731 to run a tavern when our other property, Mr. Barnes, passed away in 1731 because travelers needed a place to spend the night and get food and drink. And so by 1736, they allowed him to run a tavern, and that was over on Route 1, possibly closer to where Webb Road is north of here. And that was his original family home. So he lived over there on Route 1 and ran a tavern, and the ferry wasn't too far away. So people would come to the tavern and then possibly find its location, make their purchase, and there was also a small log cabin over at the ferry. So there was also a little ferry house over there. So he had the ford, the ferry, and a tavern. So he was a big businessman. He was a very wealthy individual for the time. And so that's why the town has then adopted his name. And also, we had changing boundaries in the counties. This became Delaware County. So then we had Birmingham Township in Delaware County and Chester County. It was confusing. So the Delaware County portion of Birmingham became Chadds Ford. So now John Chadds has a township named after him.
It's worth keeping in mind also that Baltimore Pike, present day Route One, did exist at a road as a road in the 1700s. It was called Ye Great Road to Nottingham, but it was still the main overland thoroughfare between Philadelphia and Baltimore. So the reason that John Chads established a ferry here is that there was a lot of traffic traveling through this area over the Brandywine Creek from Philadelphia west and from Maryland up north to Pennsylvania.
What role did Chadds Ford play in the Revolutionary War in the original 13 colonies?
Yeah, so the role that Chadds Ford played in the Revolutionary War, so as Howe was making his way towards Philadelphia, he wanted to capture the capital, as that was a common way to win wars in Europe in the 18th century, and they knew that Philadelphia was also a symbolic place that if they did capture it, could change the course of the war. And General George Washington chose Chadds Ford as the place to make his stand. And he chose the Brandywine River as kind of one of the last obstacles that the British would have to get through to get to Philadelphia. And so he ended up guarding the fords around this area. Mm-hmm. South of here, Piles Ford was guarded by General John Armstrong. Generals Mad Anthony Wayne and Nathaniel Greene guarded Chadds Ford. And then Generals Sullivan, Stevens, and Sterling's had the high ground north of here, which were Brinton's Ford, Jones's Ford, Wister's Ford, and then Moses Hazen also had a regiment that was guarding a northern ford. And Howe was he was reluctant to launch a full scale attack on the Americans at that time, and actually opted for a flanking maneuver. So as General Kniphausen's men were stationed on the other side of the Brandywine with their artillery, Generals Howe and Cornwallis marched 17 miles north and outflanked the Americans, eventually ending up at Osborne Hill, which is not too far from here. And then they had tea and kind of planned out the rest of their afternoon. And by the time that General George Washington realized that he was being flanked, they pretty much caught Sullivan's and Stevens and Sterling's mid-maneuver when they were adjusting to try and counter that flank. Eventually, Sullivan's gave way and they broke through. Stevens held them off for a while and allowed the Americans to make a strategic retreat. And then, the rest of the fighting happened here at Chadds Ford, and they retreated to Chester. So it's known as a turning point battle of the American Revolution, not because we won, but because Washington demonstrated his determination to stay in the fight. They didn't get captured. They made a strategic retreat. And unfortunately, Philadelphia was taken, but it really didn't end the war at that point. If anything, it split up, Burgoyne, Clinton, and Howe from each other. It made it more difficult.
The one thing I was going to add was the reason it also became a turning point was because Washington leaves New York and leaves Burgoyne undefended. And so then Saratoga falls. And so even though we lost, as Spencer mentioned, it showed the French that the Americans were in it. And really the cause was stronger than they believed. And so that brought the French in. And with that was the turning point, because the French really aided us for the future.
And this was also the first time that the Marquis de Lafayette saw action, saw combat. He was made a kind of an honorary major general, and no one really expected him to do anything except stay out of the fight. But he went right into it and helped make that strategic retreat. And then he was wounded in the calf and taken care of in Chester. And that story of heroism went back, to France and bolstered our alliance that Benjamin Franklin was working on.
Just briefly, I wanted to touch on the section of the question that asks the significance of Chadds Ford to the 13 colonies generally, is essentially that this was a prosperous agricultural community. Most people owned large plots of land. They primarily were farmers, wheat, corn, flax for clothing, wool for clothing. Most people kept horses and sheep if they could afford them. So it's sort of a prosperous symbol of the mid-Atlantic colonies generally. And the fact that it was so near to Philadelphia was part of how they were able to basically ship all their staple goods out to Philadelphia to maintain connections with the United Kingdom and to turn all their agriculture into profit.
And the other key significant factor is the Brandywine River, because there were numerous mills along the river. So that also added to this prosperous area.
Was this considered a Tory area?
Chadds Ford area, Chester County, and northern Delaware in general were heavily populated by Quakers, mostly as a result of William Penn's land grant, who was a Quaker back in the 1600s. But most Quakers tended to lean loyalist. They were against war and rebellion in general. And one of the key reasons that the British were able to outflank the Americans to the north is that there were local Quakers who told them about these fords further to the north because they were sympathetic to the British cause.
What was the mission of Chadds Ford? What is your guys' mission? How do you work to preserve the local heritage?
Yeah, so the mission of Chadds Ford is to preserve the properties, records, and artifacts, to interpret the history, to educate the public concerning the way of life in the Chadds Ford area with an emphasis on the 18th century. And to accomplish this mission, the Society preserves and maintains the John Chadds House, the John Chadds Spring House, and the Barnes Britton House. And we also host educational programs in the Barnes Britton House for school groups. We have summer camps that educate the participants on the history of the area and of these buildings and the importance of maintaining and preserving them. And then we also give guided tours, and sometimes just in regular clothing, other times in colonial garb. to really, set the scene.
And the other things that we do is we also have fundraisers,
Mhm.
and our two major fundraisers are in the fall. So it started out, as you saw in the video, as Chad's Ford Days. I think it began in 1958 with Chris Sanderson and Andy Wyeth, who were strong influences of the Revolutionary War. So it's always around September 11th during the day of the battle. And it has morphed into another event that we call Battle at Chad's Ford, which is Historic Chad's Ford Days, where we have multiple regiments and we have reenactments, small reenactments of the Battle of Brandywine. We also have demonstrators, authors, historians. It's a full weekend of 18th century revolutionary immersion. And then in October, we have the Great Pumpkin Carve, which is also historic in nature. It started out with Andrew Wyeth and his son over on the Chad's Ford Inn, and they were carving who could carve the best pumpkin, from what we understand. It's also in our oral histories. I believe it was Andy Wyeth that stepped back to admire his pumpkin and almost was run over on Route 1, if that's true. And so the event outgrew itself there, and then it moved, I believe, to Hank's Place, then to the Brandywine River Museum. It kept getting larger, and then we took it over probably 25 years ago. And so it's been our major fundraiser ever since. And we're constantly improving and changing it to accommodate all our visitors.
I just want to say thank you so much to the Chad's Ford Historical Society for having us and sharing your time, knowledge, and stories. It was an honor to connect with such a meaningful part of history and be part of a conversation where both of our missions, preserving the past and pushing forward with purpose, could come together. This was a mutual effort in helping share and spread a story that matters, and we are truly grateful for that. We are also excited to come back this fall for our first time at the Great Pumpkin Carve in October. We've heard such great things and can't wait to be a part of it. Until then, thank you again for your warmth, your passion, and your part in this journey. We'll see you again soon.